News crew murdered. The shooting death of a Virginia reporter and photographer are seen on live TV. Trump tirade. A Q&A turns into a shouting match between the candidate and a high-profile Hispanic journalist. Swarming to safe refuge. The church focuses on the pastoral needs of people on the move. And music for the Mass. Choirs rehearse for next month's papal Mass of canonization at the National Shrine. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, August 26th, 2015. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. A reporter and photographer are gunned down during a live television interview near Roanoke, Virginia. The suspect, a former reporter who had been fired by their station, later turned the gun on himself. Early this morning, WDBJ reporter Allison Parker and cameraman Adam Ward were shot and killed during an interview. The attack is caught live on the air. Local Chamber of Commerce executive Vicki Gardner was shot in the back. Following emergency surgery, the hospital describes her as being in stable condition.
Both Parker and Ward were residents of Roanoke, Virginia. Let us not forget, they grew up in this area. They were part of our community.
The gunman is Vester Flanagan, a former reporter with the station who went by the on-air name of Bryce Williams. He worked at the station for about a year before he was fired.
Figure out any connection with those people who were among the kindest, nicest people who worked here.
Flanagan apparently shot himself when he was confronted by police along a Virginia interstate. Investigators tonight are trying to piece together a possible motive. A few hours after the shooting, Flanagan posted a series of tweets and Facebook posts, as well as 2 videos of the attack. He appears to have filmed those himself. Twitter and Facebook have since suspended his accounts.
At some point in his life, it would appear things were spiraling out of control.
For now, family, friends, and co-workers are trying to make sense of this tragedy. Parker was an up-and-coming reporter, a rock star, one anchor called her. Ward had been with the station for 4 years and was engaged to a morning producer with the station. She was in the control room when the shooting occurred. And the station manager describes Flanagan as an angry man who was difficult to work with before he was eventually fired. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The Moroccan suspect in the foiled attack on a high-speed train in France is now charged with terrorism. Yaoub Al-Kazani faces multiple counts of attempted murder, weapons possession, and conspiracy. He denies the charges. He says he stumbled on the weapons, then decided to rob passengers. Al-Kazani's older brother says his brother has no links to terrorism. Meanwhile, we're hearing more from the U.S. airmen who helped stop the attack.
It was really good. I know how it is to lose a family member, so I'm just glad that I was able to help people and kind of be there in that right moment. I feel like everything happens for a reason. It sounds cliche, but every single thing we did that day, things I've done up into my life, things my friends have done up into their lives that were with me, it all came together as one that day.
Stone says if it wasn't for his friends Alex Scarlatos and Anthony Sadler, who helped tackle that man, he'd be dead. Donald Trump grabs headlines again, this time for kicking Hispanic journalist Jorge Ramos out of a news conference Tuesday. The leading Republican presidential candidate defends his actions today. Suzanne LaFranchi has more.
This morning, Trump told NBC's Today Show that Ramos was, quote, ranting and raving like a madman. The Univision anchor confronted the billionaire at a news conference over his controversial immigration plan. With Donald Trump campaigning in Dubuque, Iowa,
who would you rather have negotiating against China, against Iran?
Much of the attention focused on his press conference earlier in the day and a testy exchange between Trump and Univision anchor Jorge Ramos.
Okay, who's next? Yeah, please. Excuse me, sit down. You weren't called. Sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Go ahead. No, you don't. You haven't been called. Go back to Univision.
At that point, security removed Ramos from the room.
just got to wait your turn. You don't just start taking over the press conference.
I can ask a question.
Yes, in order.
I have the right to ask a question.
Okay. When you have that turn.
I have the right to ask a question.
The president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists released a statement condemning Trump for letting Ramos be ejected, saying in part Mr. Ramos was doing what journalists have done for decades, asking questions. Ramos was eventually let back in about 15 minutes after being kicked out.
Good to have you back. Thank you very much.
And Ramos had an opportunity to challenge Trump on his immigration platform. Ramos told ABC's Good Morning America that he's never been thrown out of a news conference, and he defended his criticism of Trump's immigration plan, saying a journalist has to take a stand. Brian?
Suzanne LaFranchi, thank you. The Mormon Church keeps its longtime affiliation with the Boy Scouts, despite the Scouts' recent decision to allow gay troop leaders. Meanwhile, Charleston Bishop Robert Guglielmone says he is cautiously optimistic that Catholic Church ties with the Boy Scouts can also be maintained. The Holy Father urges parents to make time for prayer in their busy lives. He praises parents for all the work they do.
I 24 ore non so come fanno, ma si muovono e fanno. È tanto lavoro in famiglia.
Parents, he said, should win a Nobel Prize for the way they managed to squeeze 48 hours work into just 24 hours. At today's general audience, the Pope encourages parents to teach their children to pray, to read the Bible, and to make the sign of the cross. He reminds the crowds that next Tuesday, September 1st, the Church marks the first World Day of Prayer for the care of creation. Father Mark Nestout with the Archdiocese of Washington is co-coordinator of the liturgy for the papal visit here next month. Father, you're standing in front of the site where the papal mass will be held at CUA's campus at the National Shrine. Are there any tickets left for this event?
There are no tickets left. All have been allocated. There's 26,500 tickets available for the event. All of them have been allocated throughout the Archdiocese, throughout the dioceses in California, various organizations, Sarah Club, all of those different organizations. Those tickets are now allocated for them. We'll have 12,500 who have seats and 12,500 who will have to stand watching the Mass, and then a few people also inside the shrine. So in that way, we will have a very large celebration, but probably the best seat in the house for many who don't have a ticket is at home watching it on TV.
Of course, here on EWTN, you can see it live. But Father, with so many people there and so much media attention, how do you keep this a sacred celebration rather than a media circus?
Even though we're outside, we're creating a space that's very beautiful, and it will be elegant. It will also allow us to have a solemnity of the celebration of the canonization. So the sanctuary will be very beautiful. It'll come out of the portico. The chairs and everything will be set up as if you're in a church. So people will feel as if they're actually inside a church in a way.
Father Mark Nestout, we appreciate you very much. Thanks so much for the update.
Thank you.
We'll have many more of those coming. Stocks finally regained ground today, erasing some of the staggering losses over this past week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, after taking a last-minute dive yesterday, today holds on to close up nearly 620 points. The Nasdaq rose more than 190 points. Aaron Klein is director of the Financial Regulatory Reform Initiative at the Bipartisan Policy Center. So finally, the tide turns, at least for today. Why do you think that was?
Well, markets go up and down. Lots of variance in markets on day to day. We're in a period of wild swings. It's a wild ride on Wall Street, but I wouldn't read too much into any one movement on any day.
So we're not really seeing financial panic then? You would call this more of the correction?
I think it's a correction. The market had been at record highs. If market had kept going on, April would have been the second longest bull market period in history. Markets go up and they go down. This isn't a financial panic. I was there in Congress when the stock market fell 1,000 points in an hour when we voted down TARP. The situation then was completely different than now. This is a correction, not a panic.
The swings are so wide, though. There's, hundreds of points. I remember the day when it would be 20, 25 points one way or the other. So this volatility, do you think that the Fed, when it considers this interest rate hike for the fall, will the volatility play into that?
It absolutely will. This is very reminiscent to me of 2013 when there was something called the temper tantrum, where the bond market, not the equity market, but bonds as opposed to stocks, got very afraid of the Fed raising interest rates, lifting off, which they haven't done in many years, and the market reacted very, very strongly, and the Fed backed off. And I think they'll delay rates now, so I don't think rates will rise in September.
So is this confined to Wall Street, or will Main Street feel the effect of this fluctuation?
So I don't think Main Street will terribly. I think one of the ways Main Street will actually benefit will be lower oil prices. I mean, part of the huge swings on Wall Street have been the price of oil, which has really fallen. So as gas falls, could be below $2 a gallon. I think people on Main Street will actually see a little more money in their pocket.
Are you concerned at all about financial institutions, banks failing as things get so crazy?
So there's some banks that I think, particularly those that are in energy or heavy and around oil parts, Texas, New Mexico, now North Dakota with fracking. But this isn't at all like 2008 when there's an endemic panic throughout our entire financial system with a house of cards. And banks are in much better position today as a result of some of the rules and laws changed in the Dodd-Frank Act and others in financial reform, and also simple common sense. It's been a while since the financial panic, but it's still fresh in everybody's memory. People aren't making the same mistake twice.
Aaron Klein with the Bipartisan Policy Center. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, thousands flock across Hungary's border with Serbia, even as the government rushes to put up a high fence. And a family treks by car all the way from Argentina to see the Pope at the World Meeting of Families. Today we celebrate the feast of Our Lady of Częstochowa. The 4-foot-high revered icon known as the Black Madonna is housed in a Polish monastery. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Refugees swarm into Hungary from Serbia despite frantic government efforts to erect a high fence on the border. Police data shows more than 2,000 people arriving daily in Hungary, the highest figures so far this year. This group from Aleppo, Syria is traveling on foot with several children.
We just left from Syria because the life is possible. As I said, there is a bomb, there is a kill, there is a blood, money of blood. I'm feeling sad and sorry for my country. Destroyed.
The arriving migrants are detained by police to be registered. They're then sent by train to refugee centers across the country. More migrants and refugees arrive in Greece aboard inflatable rubber boats. Many of them are originally from Syria and other war-torn areas of the Middle East. They cram onto these flimsy boats to make the 1-hour crossing from nearby Turkey. As they land, many take selfies, others cheer. A man falls to his knees, cries, and prays. This man from Damascus says his family chose him to make the journey alone.
It was very sad. I hugged my family one by one. They cried and me cried, and you know, it's like everyone hits goodbye, you know.
This small island in Greece has seen as many as 33,000 migrants arrive in August. That figure comes from the human rights group Amnesty International. More than 100 migrants are rescued by the Italian Coast Guard off the Libyan coast and brought to the island of Lampedusa. Meanwhile, about 50 bodies were found in the hull of a migrant boat. Close to 2,400 people have now died at sea this year trying to make the dangerous Mediterranean crossing to Europe. Father Matthew Gardzinski of Pontifical Council for Migrants and Itinerant People joining us from Rome. Father, we want to talk to you about the influx of migrants into Europe, but first, the significance of this special day and where you are today.
The church in Poland actually today celebrates the feast day of Our Lady of Częstochowa, which is the image of Our Lady that you see behind me right now. It's one of the most famous images of Our Lady that most Poles, not only in Poland but around the world, honor. And today is a special day because it's a day of prayer not only for the church in Poland, for the entire country, but also for all those who are spread out around the world.
Well, happy feast day to you and all others celebrating this day. Talk about the migrants that are flowing into Italy and the rest of Europe and how the church is able to care for them.
We're talking about not only parishes, priests, religious, but also a lot of lay persons who travel and meet these migrants who are in first and foremost need of just physical assistance, and then afterwards also the spiritual care or the the psychological accompaniment that they do after going through quite a hardship to get here to Italy or to other places around Europe.
It is heartbreaking to see them have to give up their whole lives and start all over again. These people on the move, in transition. What do you think is their greatest need?
First and foremost, when you look at them as persons, which is the perspective that the church always tries to remind whatever body that they're speaking to, that conscience that these are human persons who have a concrete story, who have a concrete face, who are touched by very different reasons that kind of force them to move. So on the one hand, you have that thought that they are people who require human dignity, who require that care. On the other hand, you also have the other aspect to the entire problem, which kind of also requires that physical assistance. That at times it becomes quite an emergency, as it is right now, not only here in Italy, but in other places around Europe.
Would you say that we have a moral obligation to help them?
Definitely, at a certain point, because from the Christian perspective, they are brothers and sisters. No matter whether or not they are Christians or not, or whatnot, we are part of one human family. And the church has always been an advocate or a defensor for the right of everyone to live in dignity. And so when you look at these persons, like I just mentioned, they are people that have a face. We look at them as an individual person who is going through different hardships, and that moral obligation ties into that.
Father Matthew Gardzinski joining us from Rome. Thank you, Father.
You're welcome.
And Palestinians want to raise their flag along with the Vatican flag at the UN headquarters in New York as Pope Francis visits there next month. Supporters of the idea are betting that the U.S. and other allies of Israel won't block the plan and risk offending the Holy See. The Vatican's mission to the UN earlier expressed support for the idea. However, it circulated a letter this week distancing itself from it. From New York, Pope Francis takes a short trip south to the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. More than 1 million people are expected to join him for an outdoor mass there, including one family now taking a road less traveled. Mark Irons has their story.
Even if you fly, it takes 14 hours. So would you really want to drive in a van from Buenos Aires, Argentina to Philadelphia?
We are so happy now that we finally did it.
Meet the Walkers on an 11,000-mile pilgrimage to see the man who inspired the name of their van.
Francisca, because of the Pope.
In March, Noel and husband Katire left Buenos Aires with their 4 children. Destination, Philadelphia, for the World Meeting of Families at the end of September. As Francisca drives into Philly, Francis will fly there.
If we could see him, we would give him a very, very big hug, I think.
The Walkers have faced challenges, mudslides in Chile and a broken odometer in Colombia. But Noel says fear won't stop the family.
Letting go many fears that we have that sometimes are an obstacle to do things that you really want. So to learn to overcome those fears and to trust other people.
And it's the love of family that keeps fueling this journey.
Our trip is about sharing with others, about meeting other families, and it's like the same spirit of the meeting, no?
Well over halfway there, with no signs of stopping.
When I spoke with Noel over the phone today, family was in the van a couple hundred miles north of Mexico City. They hope to cross into the U.S. on Sunday or Monday. You can follow the family's progress at americainfamilia.com. And Brian, about 2,000 miles left of Philly. Stay tuned for more.
I see a movie in the making here. Let's call it Pilgrimage.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Up next, pro-life. Yeah, there's an app for that. And we visit one of several choirs now practicing for the Papal Mass here in Washington. Pope John Paul I was elected on this day in 1978, succeeding Paul VI. Known as the Smiling Pope, he was the first pope to select a double name. He died only 33 days into his pontificate. Thanks for joining us on this 26th of August. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, the words used in media to describe an unborn child can be very telling. They're not limited, though, to the language of journalists. A recent article in The Federalist looks at the language used in pregnancy apps compared with online searches for abortion. Author Serena Sigalito says searches for abortion led to sites with no reference to a baby. But those pregnancy apps, usually targeting women who embrace their babies, not only refer to a child, but they use he or she and not it. Serena Sigolito is with us, the managing editor of Public Discourse. What have you discovered about the language in these apps?
Well, what I think is really striking about the language is really two characteristics. First, that it's very scientific, and the second, that it's very personal. So as you go through the app, it describes the development of the unborn child from the moment of conception, when it's a single cell, to when it begins to divide, it becomes a blastocyst. It implants in the uterus, it becomes an embryo and then a fetus, but it's always described as your baby, what's happening with your baby.
From the very beginning?
From the very beginning.
From conception?
Yes.
How interesting that these apps would be out there. Now, you discovered these as you're pregnant and expecting, and have they helped?
Yeah, it's great. My baby's the size of an onion now.
They use vegetables.
Yes,
That's something that we can relate to, that size. But Planned Parenthood uses an entirely different language. Make a comparison for us.
Well, I would say, I would characterize the languages by Planned Parenthood as being very vague and very impersonal. So when you look at the descriptions that are put there for women who are considering abortion, the abortion procedure is described not as removing the embryo and the placenta or anything scientific like that, but as removing the pregnancy or ending the pregnancy, as if it were an illness like a cold or a flu that you simply need to remove from your body.
The reality doesn't change. How can the language be so different?
Yeah, I think that reveals something really problematic about our culture, which tends to be very relativistic and subjective in its vision of truth. So if, and the language that's used to describe reality. So if a child is wanted, then it's described as a child. But if it's not, then it's simply a pregnancy.
How can we use this comparison of language and see how people are using language as we move forward in the right to life movement?
Well, I think that the euphemistic language that surrounds abortion really reveals something really important about the mindset of the average pro-choice voter. Because I would venture to say that most abortion supporters are driven by a sense of compassion, and that's compassion for the mother who's facing a scary situation. And that's a good impulse and something that pro-lifers should laud them for and also act upon. But where we need to call them out is when they deny the humanity of the unborn child. And in doing so, and in looking at the technology of things like smartphone apps, it becomes clear that the supposedly compassionate option of abortion is actually an attack on an even more vulnerable human life.
Very important point from Public Discourse. Serena Sigolito, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
In just 27 days, Pope Francis arrives here in Washington. While here, he celebrates the first canonization ever on U.S. soil. Tonight, Jason Calvi previews some of the music for that special Mass.
The successor of St. Peter will hear this music when he celebrates Mass in the nation's capital.
It is my job to engage the assembly, to even engage Pope Francis, the Holy Father himself. If he feels so inclined to sing, I hope that he does.
Rebecca Vanover and about 330 others tried out. Only 90 made the cut to join the Archdiocese of Washington's Papal Mass Choir. In total, 5 choirs will sing at the Mass. 250 singers will be joined by a 50-piece orchestra and a 15-piece brass section.
Hopefully the music that we will create will inspire someone or allow people to have a richer connection with God.
American composer Aaron Copland's music will be featured.
'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free.
A composer from the Pope's homeland, Argentina, will also be part of the repertoire.
We're trying to somehow catch the spirit of our new Pope and his roots in Latin America.
And they have less than a month to hit every note. In Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
The universal language of music. How beautiful. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. You can watch again on YouTube. We leave you tonight with memories of the smiling Pope, John Paul I, who succeeded Paul VI on this day in 1978, but died only a month later. Good night. God bless you.